Hey, this video is a tutorial for how random encounters work in the Magic of Scheherazade, and how we can take advantage of it in order to avoid some early encounters without too much trouble. So, as anyone who's played this game knows, sometimes at screen transitions, turn-based encounters can show up, and if we're speedrunning the game, we want to avoid as many of those as possible, since they waste time. Now, turn-based encounters can't just appear anywhere in this game, but instead, certain screens are flagged as encounter screens, and when we leave those particular screens, there's a chance that a turn-based battle can show up. So, let's look at the first few encounter screens we would see. Pull up a save state here. So, in the eclipseless route, there are 12 encounter screens we would come across in Chapter 1, and the first one is this one right here. This is just before getting to the time door. When we walk off this screen, there's a chance that a turn-based battle can show up. And note also that where we leave the screen doesn't matter. If we tried to leave at this transition instead, walking up, we still get the encounter. The second encounter screen we would come across is this one right here, just after the time door. Having gotten to the past, a turn-based battle can show up here. The third encounter screen we would see is a bit later in the past. This is after having already left Rudoria, and on the walk to Horin. We can get a turn-based battle at this transition. The fourth encounter screen is this one right here, east of the maze entrance and several screens south of Horin. We can get a turn-based battle right here. And in the eclipseless route, where we skip the maze... gotta reload that state. In the eclipseless route, where we skip the maze, the fifth encounter screen would be 2 screens later. There we go. So, not this screen, but this screen. When we exit it, there's a chance a turn-based battle can show up. The sixth encounter screen we would see is this one again, but this time we'd be walking back to the time door. But as we see, an encounter can show up. Encounter screens 7 through 9 are all on the walk to the North Cape. There are 3 back-to-back-to-back screens just before getting to the North Cape. And then encounter screens 10 through 12 are all in the palace. Now, on the Discord for this game, there's a map of the encounter screens in all 5 chapters. This video is going to focus on Chapter 1, since this is where we can reasonably manipulate out of them. As it turns out, it's actually really simple to get out of the first 3 encounters, and if we keep the manip up, which will take some extra effort, then we can get out of additional encounters as well. Now, if you're new to speedrunning this game, then there's really no reason you even need to do the manip, although the original manip to get out of the first 3 is fairly straightforward. Now, to see how this works, I'm going to pull up some variables. Give me a second to load this Lua script. Okay, so these 3 variables shown here are part of a block of variables that CT187 found when he was looking at ways to manipulate encounters. The variables R1 and R2 are both directly related to whether or not we get turn-based battles. In general, lower values of R1 correspond to a lower encounter rate, and we'll make this more specific later on in the video. But note that right now, as time passes, whether we're in the town or outside, R1 and R2 are cycling. R1 is going 10, 18, 20, 28, 10, 18, 20, 28, etc. R2 is cycling 2460, 2460, and both count up at the same time. The cycling only occurs when we actually have control of the character, like right now. So for instance, if I were to pause, the cycling stops while I'm in the menu. Now, as it turns out, if R1 is at 10, the lowest value it cycles through, this actually will guarantee avoiding the first 3 encounters. So we'd like a way to somehow freeze R1 at 10. Well, watch what happens when I take damage. So I just took damage there. What happened is the value of R2 got knocked down to 0. And now, I can stand here, I can walk around, I can spend all the time I want. R1 and R2 are no longer cycling. They're frozen in place. So this variable d here is a damage count variable, and in particular, when damage equals 0, or when the value of that variable d is 0, R1 and R2 are fixed. Oh, sorry, when d is 0, R1 and R2 are cycling. When d is greater than 0, R1 and R2 are fixed. And note that when I take damage again, the value of d would increase once again, and so on. Well, the fact that we can take damage to fix the values of R1 and R2 means we can easily get out of the first 3 encounters by fixing R1 at 10. So this leads to the idea of the easy manip. As long as we take our first damage at a suitable location, we'll avoid the first 3 encounters. Now, of course, in an actual speedrun, we would not be able to see the values of these variables, but at the beginning of the game, they cycle at a predictable speed, and so we can see where a good place to take our first damage would be. So R1 cycles up to 18 before we have the chance to take any damage, so we're going to look for where it cycles back around to 10. And it's going to be important not to take any damage until then, because we don't want to freeze R1 at the wrong value, like what just happened there. Taking damage there froze R1 at 20, and we don't want that. Now, all the screens before we want to take the damage have a reliable way of handling them to avoid taking damage, but if you're worried that you'll take damage at the wrong time, you always have the option of just walking off the screen and despawning any enemies. Okay, so let's keep going and see where R1 and R2 cycle back around. Okay, so right here, right around when we enter this screen, is when R1 cycles back around to 10. Now, in fact, it's possible that if we take damage on this screen, it'll be too early. R1 might not quite have cycled back around yet, so I prefer to still avoid taking damage on this screen and go for one of the next 2 screens instead. Either the bees here, or the bandits here. So, taking damage on either of those screens, assuming we've walked at a relatively normal speed, we'll fix R1 at 10, like we want. So let me load a different save state here. So this save state is just before R1 and R2 cycle back around to 10. So right here, the bees showed up, and that's probably the simplest way to take damage. Those bees won't always show up, and if they don't, then we've got these bandits here as another option. And we've got plenty of time to spawn them. See, even though it took all those tries to spawn them, the damage will still in time, and R1 is fixed at 10. Let's do this a couple more times. So no bees this time, we'll need to spawn the bandits. And oh, by the way, we try and spawn those bees. There we go. You don't want to try and chase the bees down on this screen because it'll take forever to catch them. So if the bees don't show up the first time, you should go with the bandits instead. So spawn them, take damage, and R1 is fixed at 10 like we want. No bees this time. Once again, we can just spawn the bandits. No bees again. Just trying to get them to spawn by stopping for a second. Didn't work. But taking damage there works. So there we got the Bs, we could just take damage right there. Note, by the way, after this, taking additional damage doesn't really matter. Of course, we don't want to lose the HP, but R1 will still be fixed at 10 if we take additional damage. As long as the damage counter doesn't get up to 5, which we'll address later. Now, there are some situations where the bandits just don't seem to want to spawn, and there is a backup plan in situations like that. So let's say we keep trying to spawn the bandits and they just don't show up, and at some point we may make a judgment call that it must be too late. Of course, we wouldn't be able to see these variables in an actual speedrun, so it would just have to be a judgment call. But if you don't get the bandits in time, there is a backup plan, and that's to take damage when R1 hits 10 again. And there's a certain screen that's convenient for this. Again, we want to be sure not to take damage at the wrong time, though, because we don't want to freeze R1 at the wrong value. So right here, R1 just changed to 10. This screen might be too early, but the next screen is a good one. So the bandits that sometimes spawn on this screen, these bandits are conveniently timed to freeze R1 at 10. Note that even though it took me forever to spawn them this time, it was still in time to freeze R1 at 10. And now that R1 equals 10, we're guaranteed to avoid the first 3 encounters. I'll show it here with the first encounter. We did not get it. Okay, so again, all we have to do is just take our first damage at a good spot. The ideal screen is this one or this one. And as long as the value of R1 stays at 10, we'll avoid the first 3 encounters. Okay, so if you just want to start out and try the manip, then this is certainly a good place to start. After all, guaranteeing avoiding the first 3 encounters is certainly nice, but we can actually keep the manip going as well. Now, if R1 stays at 10, we actually are set up to get the 4th encounter, so if we want to keep avoiding additional encounters, we're going to need to do some additional work. So I'm now going to pull up a chart which shows whether or not we'll get each encounter based on the values of R1 and R2. So in this chart right here, true represents getting the encounter, false represents avoiding it. And the way this works is, for each possible combination of the values of R1 and R2, there's a sequence of 8 true-false values. And that sequence determines whether or not we get each encounter. The sequence repeats every 8 encounter screens. So for instance, like right now, if we stay on 10-0, what'll happen is we'll avoid the first 3 encounters, get the 4th one, miss the 5th one, get the 6th one, and so on. Well, in order to keep avoiding encounters, obviously that means by the time we get to the 4th encounter screen, we'll no longer want R1 and R2 to be fixed at 10-0. So, to see how we can change the values of these variables, let's pull up some additional variables. So give me a second, I need to pull up another Lua script here. Okay, so what we see right here is the complete block of variables that CT187 found when he was looking at ways to manipulate encounters. This Lua script is available on the Discord for this game, if you want to mess with it. But we see several more variables here. So in addition to those 3 variables we already saw, we've got B. The variable B is just a counter for the number of encounter screens we've crossed so far. So for instance, let me pull up one of the save states. How about this one? Right here, I'm standing on the 4th encounter screen, and the value of B is 3. And once I leave this encounter screen, the value of B will tick up to 4, since we've now exited 4 battle screens. And it would tick up whether or not we actually got the encounter. Note here, leaving this screen, it doesn't increase, but leaving this screen, which is an encounter screen, it does increase. The variable K is a kill count. We'll look at that in more detail, but note that when I shoot an enemy, once that explosion disappears and we see whether we got a drop or not, that's when the value of K ticks up. The value of C, or rather C, is a time countdown, and when the countdown hits 0, that's when R1 and R2 cycle up, if they're cycling. Now, right now they aren't cycling because the value of damage is not equal to 0, but if I load a different save state, so right here, we'll see that as soon as the counter hits 0, then R1 and R2 will both increment up. Like that. And at the beginning of the game, the counter starts off at 4B each time. Finally, the variable D is still the damage count variable we saw before. There's also that question mark variable. I don't know what it does. It seems to go back and forth between 0 and 1, but I haven't figured out what it does, and haven't really needed it as far as encounter minute. Okay, so this kill count variable is going to be critical as far as controlling the values of R1 and R2. So let's look a little more in depth at how it works. Okay, so right here, this save state's not on the manip route, so we're actually getting this encounter, but that doesn't really matter here. So we've already seen that. Let's get some enemies here. When we kill an enemy, the kill count variable doesn't increment until after the explosion disappears, so note that if I leave the screen quickly before it disappears, it doesn't increase. Also, note that when we take damage, the kill count variable immediately resets to 0. Now, the key to continuing manip past the third encounter is the fact that when the kill count reaches 10, then R1 and R2 start cycling again. So let's see how this happens. In fact, let me reload the save state, so it's at 5. Okay, so 6, 7, 8, 9. Well, okay, when the explosion disappears, that'll be 9. Note that damage is at 2 right now, but once we get one more kill, without taking damage, which would reset the kill count, so like what just happened there, for instance, but we can get 10 kills quickly here. Let's just reload the save state. So once the kill count gets to 10, damage will go back to 0, and that'll start R1 and R2 cycling again. So 9, 10. By the way, note during the level up text, the counter is frozen. Just like if you were in the pause menu, we don't have control of the character right now, so none of the variables are cycling. Okay. So, having just gotten to 10 kills, the kill count reset to 0, and in fact we got 2 kills after that, so it's now at 2. But now R1 and R2 are cycling again. Another way we can control the values of R1 and R2 is by taking additional damage. So as we've already seen, taking damage from an enemy increments the value of D, and when D is not equal to 0, R1 and R2 are frozen in place. And there's another feature that we're not going to want to use, but we do need to keep in mind. If the damage counter hits at least 5, then that's going to cause R1 to go down and R2 to go up a level. That also will reset damage to 0 the next time the counter hits 0. So for instance right here, damage got over 5, and when the counter hits 0, let's just let that happen. Stop the beeping. When the counter hits 0, damage resets back to 0, and R1 in fact went down a level, R2 went up a level. Now, even though it may seem good to have R1 be able to go down like that, we're not going to want to rely on that because that requires taking a lot of damage, and the HP is going to be important in a speedrun. It is worth noting though that by taking a whole lot of damage, we can actually get the value of R1 even lower than 10. We can get it down to 8, or even 0. But again, we don't want to take all that damage, and in fact, to keep the value of R1 at 0 or 8, we actually have to continually take damage. Unlike the usual values of R1, 10, 18, 20, 28, where we can freeze them in place, at these super low values of R1, R2 increments up to 2 on its own and starts the cycling again. Okay, so before we see the route we should take to avoid encounters, just as a summary, we've seen the main ways we can change the values of R1 and R2. There's the natural cycling when the damage is equal to 0, where both variables increase. We've also seen that getting 10 kills without taking damage, which would reset the kill count, getting 10 kills increases both R1 and R2 and starts the cycling back up. Taking damage can fix R2 equal to 0, and fix both the values of R1 and R2. And again, we're not going to want to use it, but taking damage 5 times affects R1 and R2 as well, without the damage counter being reset by getting 10 kills. And there's one more kind of bizarre way R1 and R2 can be affected. I'll just show this. So, right here at this save state, R1 and R2 are frozen at 10-0, and I can keep doing screen transitions and they stay frozen. There is kind of the strange property that if we happen to do a screen transition right when the counter is at 0, that'll increment up R2. So this may take a couple tries, but let's exit right at 0. There we go. R1 incremented up to 2 when we did that. Now, we won't be able to see the counter or any of these variables in an actual speedrun, so we certainly won't want to rely on this, but if it seems like you've done the manip perfectly correctly and you surprisingly get an encounter anyway, this may be what happened. You may have accidentally left a screen at exactly the wrong time and changed the value of R2, but it's pretty rare for this to happen. So, with that in mind, let's now look at the chart and see what a good way to keep avoiding encounters past the first 3 is. Okay, so as we've already seen, doing the easy manip at the beginning fixes the variables to 10 and 0 and avoids the first 3 encounters. To get out of the 4th encounter, what we can do is get our 10th kill at a good spot, such that 10-0 will increment up to 18-2 and then to 20-4 in time for the 4th encounter. If we can pull this off, then not only do we avoid the 4th encounter, but by then immediately taking damage as soon as possible after the 4th encounter screen, that would cause the value of R2 to fall to 0, fixing us at 20-0 just in time for this nice run of falses right here. So it's going to be important in order to do this, to get the 10th kill at the correct spot. Where we want to do that, it turns out, is just after the 3rd encounter screen. So let me load that save state. So this state is not on the manip, so I'll get this encounter. The 3rd encounter screen itself is too early, but this screen right here, where I'm standing, is. Get these guys out of the way. This screen right here is the ideal screen to get the 10th kill. That'll set us up perfectly in order to be at 20,4 when we cross the 4th encounter screen. Now, if the bandits don't spawn on this screen, it's not a problem. Of course, we don't want to try to spawn them because that requires walking back onto an encounter screen and possibly getting an encounter. Let's get out of this encounter. There we go. If the bandits had not spawned on this screen, then the next screen works also. We can get our 10th kill on this screen, and that's fine, although there's a small catch we'll see in a second. If the bandits had not spawned here, then we're free to try to spawn them. Okay, so let's do some actual practice runs, not of the whole chapter, but just of this part. I'll upload a separate video with some full Chapter 1 manip runs. Okay, so right here we have a save state that is on the manip. I don't necessarily even need to pause because R1 and R2 are fixed in place, so the fact that time is elapsing doesn't really matter. At this save state, right now we're at 2 kills, which is lower than usual. This might have happened if I recently took damage, perhaps. But this is after having already stopped into Rodoria and gotten the flame. So we've got a good deal of flexibility as to where we rack up our kills, because this screen right here has 4 bandits, which we can spawn or despawn at will, if we want the kills. We don't want to take damage and have the kill count fall to 0, though. That's something to watch out for. Okay, so here our kill count's at 3, now it's at 4. We can spawn these bandits and get additional kills. Now, in order to get 10 kills at a good spot, I'm aiming for having 7 kills, 6 or 7 kills, when I walk on to the 3rd encounter screen, which is this one I'm about to enter. The reason I don't want more than 7 entering this screen is because if the bandits show up, it's kind of awkward to get off this screen without getting 2 kills, and we don't want to get to the 10th kill on that screen. Now, this screen is the perfect screen to get the 10th kill. So watch what happens. R1 just went up to 18, R2 is at 2. We need to avoid damage here, so I should have jumped. I was talking and not playing properly. Let's try this again. Okay, so here the kill count's at 3. That's fairly low, so we'll want to spawn these bandits. And where the level up happens doesn't matter as far as the manip's concerned. So here we're at 7 kills. I don't want any more until the 3rd encounter screen, so I'm not going to shoot that bee. Okay, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so this gets R1 and R2 cycling at just the right time. You can always despawn these bandits if you're worried about taking damage from them. And we're about to leave the 4th encounter screen, and R1 and R2 are at 20 and 4, just like we wanted. So we'll avoid that encounter, and then at the first opportunity, usually it's the bandit that jumps out of this tree, but they didn't spawn this time. But that's okay, we can take damage from these bees instead. That fixes R1 and R2 at 20-0, just in time to avoid the next 4 encounters. Or I guess we've already passed the 5th encounter screen, but the 3 encounters after this. So we'll look at this a couple more times. Okay, so again, we're at 2 kills. If the kill count were... Whoops. If the kill count were higher, we might avoid these bandits by just walking across the top, or perhaps despawning them. With the kill count low like it is right now, we're going to want to spawn them. Sometimes they're annoying and don't spawn for a while, but the time loss there is relatively small compared to what would happen if you got stuck in an encounter. Okay. Kill count's at 6. 7. That's perfect. Bandits didn't show up here, but that's fine. Bandits did show up here, and so we'll get the 10th kill on the ideal screen once again. Okay, so to avoid these, we can jump and beat those first two, typically. Or again, you can just despawn them to be safe. So 20,4, we avoid this encounter, and now we take damage as soon as possible. That's the usual spot. And now we're fixed on 20-0, and we'll avoid the next few encounters as well. So we don't need to see those sequences of 8 anymore. Let's just go back to this view. Let's say I just left the third encounter screen and saw that these enemies did not spawn. So I'm not going to walk back onto the encounter screen and try to spawn them. Instead, we'll get the 10th kill on this upcoming screen. We can spawn the enemies. We just need to be sure not to take any damage. Okay, so that screen is almost as good, but watch what happens as we're about to leave this screen. R1 and R2 have not quite cycled to 20 and 4 yet, and if we leave the screen too early, we'll end up getting the encounter on 18-2. So, if you get the 10th kill on that second best screen, then you should wait a little bit right here before leaving, just to make sure R1 and R2 have gone up to 20 and 4. And then the manip continues as before. Okay, so let's just say our kill count's low, but we didn't spawn these bandits. So 4 kills, 5. Okay, so these enemies did not show up, but that's fine. We can get the 10th kill on the next screen. Okay, so just got the 10th kill and started R1 and R2 cycling again. And we want to wait just a little bit before leaving the screen to make sure that R1 and R2 have ticked up to 20 and 4. We then take damage at the first opportunity. That fixes us at 20-0 and gets us out of the next several encounters. Okay, so if you can carry the manip this far, this is great. You're set up to miss all of the first 8 encounters, which is a very nice time save relative to just normal play without any RNG manipulation. But there's still an option to continue the manip even further. So let's see how that works. So going back to our chart here, we're fixed at 20-0 right now. This will get us out of all the encounters up through the second one of the North Cape, but we're set up to get the last encounter on the North Cape, and if we stay at 20-0, we're going to have a rotten palace, getting all 3 of the encounters. So once again, we're going to want to rely on getting 10 kills at a suitable spot, and that way the 20-0 will cycle up to 28-2. And then, if we're at 28-2 for that last encounter screen on the North Cape, we'll avoid that encounter. And the way to continue the manip from there is let the cycling continue a little bit further until we've cycled back around to 10-4. And then take damage. That'll knock us down to 10-0. And freeze the values of R1 and R2. And that sets us up to avoid at least the first 2 encounters in the palace. So let's see where exactly a good spot to do that is. There we go. So this save state right here is on the manip. We've made it out of the past. We've avoided all of the first 6 encounters. Right now our kill count's at 3. Now, for now, I'm just going to walk through. I'm not going to worry about the kill count yet. We're just going to see how these encounters work. So, encounter screen number 7, the first of 3 consecutive encounter screens, is this one right here. Now, we're going to avoid it and the next one, since we're at 20,0, and that'll avoid the 7th and 8th encounters. But at the moment, we're set up to get this encounter. This is the 9th encounter screen, and we got the encounter. So in order to get the perfect manip, we're going to want to still be at 20-0 when leaving the 8th encounter screen, but get our 10th kill on the 9th encounter screen to tick up to 28,2. Now, this is actually fairly difficult to pull off because, for one thing, we need a very precise kill count entering that screen. We're going to need to be sure we're at 8 or 9 kills entering that screen with the bees. So, like this. And fortunately, the bees did show up here, but very often they don't spawn. And since all the screens in sight are encounter screens, we can't just try to walk off and spawn them if they didn't, because we'll just walk straight into an encounter. I think we can get by with that damage. Okay, so 5, 6, 7, 8. Need to be sure the explosions disappear. In a real run, I'd go pick up that money bag. So the bees did spawn. If we kill both of them, then the kill count, once it hits 10, now R1 and R2 bumped up to 28-2, and now we'll avoid this encounter as well. Okay, now we're going to want to take damage right when R1 and R2 cycle again. If we get the 10th kill on that screen with the bees, then we don't want to take damage immediately in the water, but a little bit later. So right around here works. Oh, okay, that actually was barely too early. Usually that'll be well-timed, though. So let's try again. Okay, I'm already at 8 kills. That's a little uncomfortable if I'm trying for the 10th kill on that screen with the bees. Because I don't... Well, here we go. Don't want to take damage yet. That would freeze us at 28-0. Okay, so right around here usually will do the trick. So now we're frozen at 10-0, and we're set up to avoid the first 2 encounters in the palace. Now, all that being said, when I'm actually playing, I typically don't go for the perfect manip. Problem is, you're completely reliant on those bees spawning, and if they don't spawn, then you don't get the chance to go from 20-0 to 28-2 in time, so you get that 9th encounter, and then it's very easy to accidentally take damage in the water and set yourself up for a bad time in the palace, getting all 3 of those encounters. So what I typically do instead is, if I have the opportunity to get the 10th kill on the screen with those bandits right before the bees, I just go ahead and take it. That gets me the 8th encounter, but also assures that I do get the manip continued and have a nice palace. So right here, kill count's already at 8. That would be a little uncomfortable if I insisted on getting the perfect manip, because I'd only want 1 kill on the next screen. But here it's fine. So, R1 and R2 just cycled up to 28 and 2. Now I will get this encounter, but I'm okay with that. We're getting this encounter because there's a true in the spot for 28-2 for the 8th encounter. Now we don't want to take damage to these bees. It doesn't matter if we get these kills or not. But since we got the 10th kill a screen earlier, now we just want to take damage as soon as possible in the water. Note that R1 already ticked or cycled back around to 10. So taking damage right here works. If those enemies don't spawn, taking damage on the fish that immediately shows up on this screen also works. So as a little recap there, If you get the perfect manip, if you get the 10th kill on those 2 Bs, you don't want to take damage immediately. So what I would do is go down first and then to the right. Whereas if you get the 10th kill on the screen with the bandits, you want to take damage earlier. And so I just go to the right and take damage either on the enemies on this screen if they spawn, or that guy right there. Alright, so let's give this a couple runs. I'm just going to play this like I would in a regular speedrun. Okay, I'm already at 9 kills. That's a little bit fast, but I can just avoid getting kills on this screen, and we're fine. So there's kill 10. By the way, if those bandits don't spawn, then the backup plan is to actually get the perfect manip on the bees. So I would want to have 8 kills entering that screen with the bandits, for that reason. So hopefully we'll escape from this encounter. Sometimes that happens. Whether or not you escape from a battle that you're already in is frame-based, so really there's no humanly reasonable way to manipulate it. Okay, so 8 kills is about what I want right now. I want to be okay if the bandits don't spawn. I want to have a shot at the bees. But if the bandits are here, again, I'm just going to go ahead and take the 10th kill. Getting this encounter. But now we're going to miss this one. And taking damage as early as possible since we got the 10th kill on the earlier screen. Now freezes us at 10-0, and we're going to miss the first 2 encounters in the palace. By the way, where the kill count would start here... here, maybe I should go back and do the previous state for a bit. Okay, so we just got the 10th kill here. We want to be absolutely certain to avoid damage until after the 4th encounter screen. Okay, so they didn't spawn this time. That works. So no need to pause a second before leaving that screen, since we got the 10th kill on the earlier of the 2 screens. So this damage right here is where the kill count resets. And I usually get two kills leaving on that screen right after taking that damage. That particular time I only got 1. But unless you accidentally take damage later, that's where the new kill count starts. At this point I have 3 kills, at least on this particular save state. And for this leg, we're going for the 10th kill on either of the last 2 screens of the North Cakewalk. So here on the bandits works, and it's kind of the safer option, even though it gets you this encounter. And once again, since I got the 10th kill on the earlier of the 2 screens this time, I just want to take damage as soon as possible underwater. So, like that. So, one last time of this leg. Let's try and go for the perfect manip this time, just to demonstrate. Okay, the bees did spawn this time, so I was lucky and I can get the perfect manip. Since the 10th kill happened a screen later, the cycling started later, so I'm not going to want to take damage immediately in the water. Because of that, I'm going to go down first. And now taking damage here should work. Yeah, so I'm now frozen at 10-0, set up to avoid the first 2 encounters in the palace here. If we stay at 10-0, then we are set up to get the 12th encounter. That's the last encounter in the palace. It's the screen right before the stone statues. However, we can get a perfect Chapter 1 with no encounters if we can set it up so that we're at 20,4 for the 12th encounter. So from here, We would go into Horan, we would buy the horns, we would get Kibabu, and then go to the palace. In this particular save state, my kill count's at 0. That might happen if you take damage to a fish underwater and don't get any kills after that. And when I'm actually playing, I'm no longer really consciously trying to manipulate. I'm just being sure I get the needed experience and trying to avoid taking damage just because I want as much HP as possible against Gilga. Of course, we're going to need to get to 80 experience in order to hit level 3. One good thing about doing the manip up to here is there's a good chance, since you've gotten all those kills, that you'll have a good amount of experience. So you won't get stuck having to grind at the end of the palace to get the last experience. Okay, so of course we can pick up that money bag. So let's just do a couple runs of the palace to see how this works. The first encounter screen in the palace is this one where I'm standing. Since we're on tin 0, we're going to miss that encounter. So I'm just kind of walking through, being careful not to take damage, but I don't want to spend too much time avoiding damage, just because, in theory, it's a speedrun. The second encounter screen is this one where I'm standing right now, but again, we're going to miss that encounter because we're on tin 0. I notice that right now my kill count has gotten up to 8. If I can get the 10th kill, there's actually a wide range that works, but right around here should do it. But getting the 10th kill will start R1 and R2 cycling again, and we'll go from tin 0 up to 18-2, and then that'll tick up to 20,4, just in time for the third encounter, or the last encounter screen in the palace. Need to be sure not to take damage from this bandit if I want a shot at that. So, it's very easy to accidentally take damage in the palace, as we just saw. That's going to throw off the manip as far as avoiding the 12th encounter. So we're just going to have to take that, but oh well. Again, since it's, in practice, hard to pull off this continued manip, and since it's more important to just preserve HP and get the needed kills anyway, I'm not really trying to manip at this point. I'll pick up the HP drink, whatever. This is the last encounter screen in the palace, the one right before the stone statues. So in this case, we're on 8,2, and that does get this encounter. And in fact, whether we cross that screen and get the encounter or not, we still don't know for sure we've missed it because there's always the chance the horn might not work on these statues. It did there, but if it hadn't, we'd have to walk back onto this encounter screen and risk getting it again. Okay, so a couple more palace runs. Okay, so again, we're entering the palace at tin 0, which is what we would be doing if we'd done the ideal manip so far. Even if we took that second encounter on the North Cape for safety. So I took damage there, but the kill count's still at 2. This is okay. I do want to at least get one run where I get out of the last encounter in the palace also. Okay, the kill count just hit 10, and that bumped R1 and R2 up to 18 and 4. Okay, so I must have exited a screen when the counter was exactly at 0, causing R2 to surprisingly increment. Let's see what effect this is going to have. We're at 18-4. I'm not on the 11th encounter screen yet. 18-4 will miss that encounter still, so we're still okay. And we would have been okay if we were at 18-2 also. And in fact, if 18-4 increments to 20,6, we'll still miss the 12th encounter. Okay, so this is the second encounter screen in the palace. We'll miss it because we're at 18-4. Taking the damage there just froze me at 18-0, and that was no good because now we are frozen, and now we're set up to get that 12th encounter. Which, in practice, that's probably only going to be a loss of a few seconds, so I would certainly play on from here. But there's the 12th encounter as expected. And since the horn worked, we're done with encounter screens for this chapter. We would just go on and do the Gilga fight. Let's try again. Not going to bother with the money bag since this isn't a real run this time. It would still be worth risking damage to pick it up, probably. By the way, this level up that I'm hitting every time is level 3. That's the level we need to be for the Gilga fight. Okay, so there's the 10th kill. We now have a shot at avoiding the last encounter as well. We just need to avoid damage. Ooh. Okay, so as we're seeing, it's very hard to reliably avoid damage in the palace. Although, I suppose you could always just despawn enemies if you are really that worried about it, and as long as you're not crossing an encounter screen doing that. Okay, took damage there, but we can still try for 10 kills. So once that explosion disappears, we'll be at 7. Okay, that'll be 10 when those explosions disappear. Okay, so we're at 18-2. Let's try not to take damage. And now we're at 24. Just in time for this encounter screen, so we avoided the last encounter in the palace as well. Or at least it appears we have. The horn worked, so now we know for sure we have. If it didn't, we could be forced back onto the encounter screen and end up getting it. Okay, so just as a review. So if you're overwhelmed by all the material we just covered, then don't worry about it. You can certainly just do the easy manip, and still, just avoiding the first 3 encounters is nice as it is. So remember the way that works. We want to take our first damage at a specific spot, right when R1 cycles back around to 10. And if you're worried about taking damage before then, you can always despawn the enemies. So here to the B works. If the bees don't spawn, let's actually have them not spawn. Okay, so let's say they didn't spawn. We also have plenty of time to spawn these enemies and take damage to them. Note that, by the way, the counter freezes when the screen is black during a screen transition, so that's why we have a whole lot of time to spawn those enemies if we need them. But if they take a long time to spawn and you think that you have run out of time, then, again, the backup option is this screen here. We would be walking left to right, but after coming up that bridge, we're on the screen south of Rudoria, but we don't actually enter that screen in a speedrun. This screen here, these bandits, are the backup plan as far as easy manip, if you can't get the first bandits to spawn in time. Alright, so one more time. Bees didn't spawn, so we'll spawn these bandits. There we go. Taking damage there froze R1, R2 to 10-0, and that's good enough to get out of the first 3 encounters. To keep the minute going, we want to get our 10th kill, or we want the kill count to hit 10 on Ideally, this screen, but if that doesn't work, this screen also works. And if those enemies hadn't shown up, we could spawn them if we needed to. But there's that little catch that if you get the 10 kills on this screen instead of the previous one, then before leaving the 4th encounter screen, this one, you should wait a second or two just to make sure that R1 and R2 have had time to cycle. Of course, this save state's not on the manip, and we're set up to get this encounter. So just pretending for a second that we are on the manip, as soon as possible after the 4th encounter screen, usually to the bandit that jumps out of this tree, we want to take damage. That'll drop us down to 20-0 and freeze us there, kind of like where we are right now. If those bandits didn't show up, the bees on this screen work also, although here they happened also not to show up. Usually for me, those bandits show up, almost always. So the next leg of the myth is, well, okay, so having taken damage to those bandits and freezing ourselves at 20-0, that's in the past before Horan, already we're set up to avoid the first 8 encounters. And if that's all you get, as far as the manip's concerned, that's still great, but if you want to keep going, then you want to try and get 10 kills on one of the last 2 screens on the North Cave Walk. So again, for safety, I typically just go ahead and get the 10th kill on these bandits if I have the opportunity, which gets this encounter, but guarantees that we get a good palace. Assuming the run makes it there. Okay, so we'll try that again. Kill counts at 8. If these bandits don't spawn, then we have the chance to try for the perfect manip on those bees. We have the chance to do that anyway, though that risks them not spawning, and that means we might not even be able to get the 10th kill and could end up stuck on 20-0 in the palace, which would be very bad. Alright, so here we're going to go ahead and get the 10th kill, getting this encounter. But now we're going to avoid this one. Let's not take damage here. Whoa, that was close. And since we got the 10th kill on the earlier of the 2 possible screens, we want to take damage as soon as possible underwater. Like that. Or if those enemies hadn't shown up, that guy works. And from here, we've frozen R1 and R2 at 10-0, and for the rest of the chapter, you should pretty much play normally. Just get the experience you need in the palace, and try to avoid damage to preserve your HP. And if you do a good enough job of that, you might get to 10 kills in the palace and start the cycling well timed enough to actually avoid the last encounter in the palace also. In chapters 4 and 5, you have access to Ramapas, and that can be manipulated as well. I'm not going to go into detail in this video, but the way Ramapas works is, basically, if Ramapas is active, you're guaranteed to avoid all encounters except every 8th encounter, which you're guaranteed to get. Basically, it's as though R1, R2 were at 0-0 instead of where they actually are. Casting Ramapas doesn't actually change the values of R1 and R2 to 0-0, but you avoid every encounter except for the multiples of 8. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching this. I hope you found it helpful. That concludes this video with the explanations. I'm going to include a separate part 2 video as well, that just shows some practice chapter 1 runs doing the manip, both with and without these variables visible. Alright, so thanks for watching, and see you next time.